This evening we're going to be continuing in 2 Samuel. As you understand from our study that we've been in for such a long time, Samuel's the prophet. He anointed Saul to be king. Saul turned out to be a bad king. God says, I need a man after my own heart. Anoints David. David ends up in enmity with Saul. This goes on for over 20 years of David's life. Finally, Saul's all of his things bring him to his end, and David starts into his kingdom. And as he takes over for the nation of Israel, he fights wars against the Philistines and the Ammonites, and he keeps having victory till finally he basically conquers everybody around him, and everything is good. And then one spring, when it's time to get up and go to war, he doesn't. And we saw him a couple chapters back fall into sin with Bathsheba and treachery and murder of Uriah, right? And Nathan calls him out and says, you're that man, right? Through a parable, and David recognizes himself in that parable. Well, the consequences go on, and Nathan would tell him, the sword's not going to depart from your house. You're going to have death in your family. And sure enough, we watch 4 of David's sons die. And a lot of this a consequence because of his failure as a father. He might have been a great king, but he wasn't a great dad. And so last week we saw that Amnon, the firstborn, the crown prince, raped a daughter of his. You can imagine the heartache with that. Well, in all of that, Absalom, the second oldest brother, conspires and eventually does kill Amnon, which brings more grief to the family. And Absalom runs away, and basically he's banished. And then Joab, the general, who the right-hand man to David, he comes up with his scheme to get this woman, an actress, to come in and play out this parable in front of David. Oh, dear king, my 2 sons got in a fight, and one of them got struck by a rock, and he killed him. And now everybody wants to kill the son that killed him. But if you do, I'll be bereft. I'll have no anybody to take care of me. Please don't let them kill the one who killed my son. And David says, no problem. And then she turns around and says, how is it that you would do that for me, but you will keep your son, who killed his brother, out of the kingdom, right? And in all of this, Joab has conspired to get Absalom back to the kingdom. But then David says, you can live in town, but I don't want to see your face. That goes on for 2 years. And this root of bitterness and this estrangement just grows stronger and more bitter. And finally, at the end of chapter 14, there's a little bit of reconciliation, and they kiss and make up. But that seed of bitterness, that root of bitterness, is just too deep in Absalom's heart. And now we're going to watch Absalom as he conspires to take the kingdom, to take the throne from his father. Okay? And Gene Edwards writes a book. I love sharing this with people. It's wonderful. How to deal with things in the workplace or in politics. It's called A Tale of Three Kings. And the 3 kings in this, it was written as a play, and then it's turned into a short little book. The 3 kings are Saul, David, and Absalom. And how each of them dealt with their opportunity, their blessing, their duty of being a king, and how Saul and Absalom failed, and David succeeded, although not well, in so many ways. But he kept coming back to God. And so there's a lot for us to learn out of this. Now, one of the things that just struck me as I'm preparing for this, because Cheryl told me, are we going to be done with this yet? Today. She goes, she's not here because she's not here because she had kids to take care of, not because she didn't want to come. But a lot of it's dark, and you're just like, this is just awful on so many levels. And yet something that occurred to me as I'm preparing today and I'm going through all this and thinking about it, I thought, we today in this world, we have satellite, internet, 24-hour news cycle. We have flies on the wall in the Kremlin. We see all of this stuff, this politics, this war, this treachery. It's like we're swimming in it. But you do know that for thousands of years, people have had a Bible, and they didn't have the internet. They didn't have a television. They didn't have the radio. They didn't know all this stuff that, quote, the elites were doing. all this tit for tat and political espionage and intrigue and all these things. It affected their lives. But they never got to go inside and see what was happening amongst these people that were pulling the strings that affected their lives. But they could read the scriptures. And in that they could see that a lot of the problems that were going on in their life, while they couldn't see it personally, they understood that it wasn't God that was causing them grief. It was man and his rejection of God that was causing them grief, because they could see what happened inside the throne room, right? So in that sort of way, when you think about it, you're like, I just don't like reading this. I hear it every day in the news. Do we really need more? I would say no, we don't, because we are exposed to all of this. But truly, I would turn off the news and turn on the good news and see this through God's eyes, through the lens that God has given it to us, so we can understand what's going on here. Kind of interesting. So we have this, the crown prince was killed by the second in line, and so now he is the second in command. He's about to become the new ruler, right? We've never seen that, where a second in command does a coup d'etat over the first in command to try to gain their place. Or is that what's going on in Chicago today? I don't know. Maybe I'm mixed up. We've never seen a king who is now getting older. David is in his late 50s to 60s right now. That's not really old, but he's not that young guy, right? That for years, you know, Saul killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. David's not doing that much anymore. And so he's getting older, a bit tarnished in the eyes of the nation. He's yesterday's news. And Absalom, now that prince is charming. Look at the hair on that guy. Right? It said when he cut his hair, it was like 5 pounds of hair every year. I mean, he was just noted for his looks. And so Absalom has been whispering and preparing to stage a coup d'etat, a stroke of state. He's about to take his dad out. We got to verse 10 of chapter 15. Actually, we got to verse 12, but I'm going to read just this, and then we're going to go. And buckle up. I'm going to try not to go into great detail on anything. Sometimes it's better to see the forest and not each tree, to see what's really going on here, right? And this is, I'm going to try to do the 30,000 foot view of what's happening here if we can, just an overview. But in verse 10 of chapter 15, then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And Absalom went with 200 men, invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew strong, and the people of Absalom continued increasing in number. And just know this, Ahithophel, grandfather of Bathsheba, okay? That might change the way we read it as we start seeing this guy. He's a skunk, okay? So, picking up where we left off last time. 2 Samuel 15, verse 13. Now a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. This doesn't sound very David-like. David is a warrior, and now he's running away from his son? And yet, this is one of the things Gene Edwards brings out in his book, whereas both Saul and Absalom desired the throne, David accepted it as God's call on his life, but it wasn't something that he grasped for or tried to hold on to. It was his at God's good pleasure, and God could take it away in a heartbeat. And in this situation, where your son is trying to take your position, and you recognize you are moving on down the halls of life, sooner or later that is going to happen, maybe the better strategy at this moment would be flight rather than fight. Is it really worth all that bloodshed to stay in power? After all, who is the king? Who is the Lord? And is he on his throne or not? So what are we fighting for? There's a little insight into that. Verse 15, and the king's servant said to the king, we are your servants, ready to do whatever the Lord my king commands. Then the king went out with all his household after him, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. So, okay, I'm going to leave, and there's this old palace and everything, and somebody's got to take care of it. So he leaves 10 concubines behind. We're going to see this play out as an answer to Nathan's prophecy back in chapter 12. But for right now, just suffice to say, besides all of his wives, here we have evidence he had concubines too. All of which is not good. Not something that God would honor. But nevertheless, that's the thing that I love about the Scriptures. Unlike all these other holy books, this tells life the way it really is, warts and wrinkles and all. And it's not to justify it. It's for us to see that in what we do, a lot of times we fall short of God's glory. And if that wasn't included in here, you'd think, oh, David was just pure awesome, and why can't I be like David? Yet here we see that he had his failings. And the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. Then all his servants passed before him. All the Kerethites and the Pelethites and the Gittites, 600 men who followed him from Gath, passed before the king. This is rather interesting. He has his servants, but all these others are foreigners. The Gittites are from Gath. That's a city in Philistia. That's where Goliath is from. David conquered Goliath and the Philistines, and yet there were people there that followed David. And it's so funny how much of these loyalties aren't from his own house, the house of Jesse, the house of Bethlehem, but he has attracted to him people from outside the kingdom. How often it is, I see it on the news constantly, that somebody migrated or immigrated here from Hungary or Poland or someplace, or China, and in the news they're advertising, they're saying, don't do this. We left this communist regime. We left Cuba. Don't do this to us again, right? And so a lot of times the loyalties can be almost stronger from people that see you with a fresh perspective. Within your own family, what would Jesus say? A prophet has no honor in his hometown, but there's others that follow with him. Verse 19. I should also say, and I'm not going to go into it, but we're going to see here David going into exile again. First with Saul, now with Absalom. But it's during this time of exile that David wrote a lot of psalms. A lot of times it's when we're in those dark caves, those valleys of the shadow of death, where we write wonderful, wonderful songs. Just me and God in this dark place. Here, there are a number of exile songs. Psalm number 3, number 4, Psalm 41, 55, Psalm 61, 62, 63, Psalm 143, and possibly, those are certainly, possibly Psalm 25, 28, 58, and 109. So a lot of what we have, and we can take comfort in the Scriptures, came out of a period of great grief in David's life. Misery loves company, they say. Well, that's usually used in the negative, but it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 that God has comforted us that we might comfort those who are going through the things we're going through. And so a lot of good was going to come out of this, much of it not blessing David or his family, but it's blessing us here thousands of years later. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you going with us? Return and remain with the king. Interesting, now he's calling Absalom the king, right? He's not holding on to his title, his position. Return and remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own place. In fact, you came only yesterday. Should I make you wander up and down with us today, since I go, I know not where? Return and take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you. But Ittai answered the king and said, As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether it be death or life, even there your servant will also be. So David said to Ittai, Go and cross over. Then Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the little ones who were with him crossed over. And it's interesting, in this place, as David is fleeing, there are those that are going to be loyal, and they're going to go with him. Just like the first lap, when he was fleeing from Saul, and he went into the caves, and then a whole bunch of disgruntled, indebted, discontented people joined to him, David's mighty men. And that continues here. We're seeing this pattern. When the chips are down, that's when you really find out who your friends are. So David said, Go and cross over, and get Ittai brought all the little ones, they crossed over. Verse 23. And the country, all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. So they're going from Jerusalem down into the valley of Kidron, then they're going to go up over the Mount of Olives, and finally down out towards the Judean wilderness, towards Jericho, towards the Dead Sea. This is the direction they're going, basically off to the east. There was Zadok also, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God, and they set down the ark of God. And Abiathar went up until the people had finished crossing over from the city. Then the king said to Zadok, Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favors in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am. Let him do me as seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok, the priest, Are you not a seer? In other words, are you not a prophet? Can you not see what God's doing here? Doesn't he give you vision? Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar, and see, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. And so David has these loyal Levites, and they pick up the ark, and they're about to take off out of Jerusalem with the ark. We're going to take this with us, with the king. And David stops and says, take the ark back. We're not worshiping an ark. We worship God. If God wants to preserve us, praise God, and he'll bring me back, and I'll be here with the ark. But if I have found disfavor in his eyes, then so be it. Let it be. But take the ark back. We're not bringing a lucky rabbit's foot along with us. And oh, by the way, you guys are seers, and you've got sons, and I could really use some moles, some informants, somebody on the inside that can tell me on the outside what's going on. So why don't you guys just skedaddle on back, take the ark, and you can be the one to give me information. Verse 30. So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up. Rather interesting, this prefigures Jesus 1,000 years later, as he walks across the brook Kidron and up the hill of the Mount of Olives to Gethsemane, weeping as he goes. And here's David, the king, but he's got his head covered. This would be sackcloth and ashes. His feet are bare. He's going in mourning. He's going in humility. He is going in a way that if there's going to be a pardon from God, he might be able to receive that. He's got to have his heart in the right place. And so it's kind of a cool pictures here. Now this is Psalm 3, Psalm 4, and Psalm 5 David wrote at this time. Let me read in Psalm 3. I'll just read the psalm. It's 8 verses. It's not very long. It'll give you a flavor for the other exile psalms. It says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone, and you have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. Selah. And so, this is that kind of heart, this kind of promise, that even though I am in the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. Just always remembering, wherever you are, whether it's a cave or you're on the run, wherever you might be, you can't outrun God. And in fact, He's going to go with you. As I said, this is a picture. It prefigures Jesus, the King of Kings, that night crossing the Kidron and going on up into the Gethsemane and crying bitter tears to God as he would relinquish or offer up, I don't know, that's theologically, I don't want to use the wrong words, but Jesus, that man, allowed himself to be humbled. We read in Philippians chapter 2 something very similar to what David is doing right here. David, the king, Jesus, the King of Kings, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. And so, some good stuff in here for us. Okay? So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up, and had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. Verse 31. Then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. Remember Ahithophel. Who's he? Grandpa to Bathsheba, okay? Is with the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. God hears that prayer, and in chapter 17, verse 14, it will be answered. And Ahithophel's counsel will be turned to foolishness. Verse 32, Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshipped God, there was Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. And David said to him, If you go on with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I was in your father's servant previously, so I will also now be your servant, then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me. So you can work against him. You can be another voice against Ahithophel. Verse 35. And do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priest with you there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Indeed, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz and Zadok's son, and Jonathan Abiathar's son, and by them you shall send me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. Okay, so Absalom now came up from Hebron, and he has now established himself in Jerusalem. But David has sent in some moles, right? Some spies. Chapter 16. When David was a little past the top of the mountain, so this is actually going down towards Bethany, right? Where Martha, Mary, and Lazarus would live. This is about where he's getting to. When David was a little past the top of the mountain, there was Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. Then the king said to Ziba, What do you mean to do with these? So Ziba said, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink. That's wonderful. Then the king said, and where is your master's son? That would be, Ziba was the servant of Saul. When Saul died, David said, is there not a descendant of Jonathan who I can do a favor to? And they found Mephibosheth, and so he brought him in and said, you eat at my table, and all of Saul's lands are your lands now, and Ziba, you be the boss and manage everything for him. Because Mephibosheth was lame in his feet and couldn't go out and work the land himself. Remember that story? So, Ziba has now showed up with all of these wonderful offerings and everything. And the king said, where is your master's son? Where's Mephibosheth? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem. For he said, today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. So the king said to Ziba, here, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I humbly bow before you, that I might find favor in your sight, O my lord, O king. So that you know, that's a lie. Ziba is lying. Okay? We're going to see this in chapter 19, verse 26 and 27. Mephibosheth did not stay back to take over the throne from David, the throne that would come to him through Saul and Jonathan. That's not the case at all. Ziba's lying, because Ziba, now David just says, oh, well, everything that was Mephibosheth, I'll give it to you, since you're the one that's loyal to me. And Ziba said, okay. Okay? All this stuff going on, it makes you wonder, right? As we look at the news and we see all these things going on in capitals of nations around the world, our own included. It even makes you wonder sometimes what goes on up in Boise. All the horse trading that goes on and all the deals that are struck. And to a certain degree, you do understand. You don't want to be naive. Legislating, lawmaking, and governing is like sausage making. Okay? You just have to put a lot of stuff in there and grind it up and spit it out. And it's not always the most purest and perfect product. Okay? Nevertheless, a lot of times some pretty bad stuff comes out. We watch it continually, and we just wonder what they said to us with certainty with their hand on the Bible a month ago. Now they're saying something completely different. And you're like, it's just whatever's politically expedient, whatever adapts itself to the changing narrative. These things aren't new. But it would be, consider yourself a common man, a farmer, a goat herder, a fisherman, a craftsman in these days. And all you know is that the economy stinks. And this war has cost us tons of money. And we're going broke. And we're under attack. And our harvests are being taken to pay off our debts. And what's happening to me? Why can't I seem to get ahead? Well, if you had your Bible, you might not know the details, but you could certainly get a sense of what happens in those ivory towers. And it might help you understand that God's got his eye on you. He hasn't forgotten you. But yes, this is kind of how it works in human government. And so, we're watching all these things come to pass. Verse 5. Now, when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera, coming from there. He came out cursing continually as he came. And he threw stones at David and at the servants of King David. And all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. Also Shimei said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man, or a man of bloodshed. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take his head off. But the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Remember, These are Joab and Abishai and his brother who was killed. And these guys they are warriors, and they're brawlers. It's almost like you went to go get your secret police from the mob or from a gang. You know, these guys are streetwise, and that's what I got to do with you guys, you sons of Zeruiah. So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? Back in chapter 15, verse 28, David had said, as it comes to pass, let God do to me as seems good to him. He had just said that prior to going down the hill. He says, whatever God brings, I'm going to take it. I'm barefoot. I'm covered in sackcloth and ashes. I'm grieving. I'm leaving the throne. You can keep the ark. I'm just going to go and see what God does in this. And next thing you know, a guy comes and curses and throws stones at you. Well, it seems to me if you prayed to God, do whatever you want, and that's what happens if God is real and he's doing whatever he wants, and you should accept it, shouldn't you? How many times we pray to God, oh God, hear my prayer, answer me. We walk out the door and something we didn't want to happen happens, and then we're mad at God because he couldn't hear us. When in reality, he heard us, and this might be his answer. And that's what David is saying. So let the guy curse me, okay? Deuteronomy 32:35, God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And David's acting quite well in all of this. And David said to Abishai and all his servants, see how my son who came from my own body seeks my life? How much more now may this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. And it may be that the Lord will look upon my affliction, literally upon my eyes, and what he's saying is my tears. Okay? Rather than getting in a huff and getting all big and bad and taking the guy's head off, maybe I should receive this chastening from God, this correction from God, this humbling from God. If this is what God wants to do with me, so be it. Again, prefiguring Christ. Why would Christ have to climb the hill to Golgotha with a cross on his back, scourged and beaten and spit upon and mocked, and his beard plucked out and nailed and crucified before the people? Why? It was God's plan. But really? Yeah, really. And in fact, God brought the most amazing victory out of that. What if Jesus had said, Dad, I don't want to? You know, that's not how it went. And so David, I think he's in a pretty good place. It may be the Lord will look upon my affliction, and that the Lord will pay me with good for his cursing this day. And as David and his men went along the road, Shimei went along the hillside opposite him, cursed as he went, threw stones at him, and kicked up the dust. Okay, he's basically a lunatic, right? It's just bugging you. But how much is this? I can't help but think of all the protests that go on around our country, and you know, and there are, I for the life of me personally, you can probably edit this or whatever, but I don't understand how we have a right to assembly and we have a right to protest, but I don't see where that means we have a right to throw rocks and burn buildings and smash windows and destroy property. That's not protest. That's crime, right? And yet we see people all the time protecting their right to protest. It's like, anyways. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but it had to come out. Okay. Verse 13, David and his men went along the road. Shimei went along the hillside opposite and cursed him, kicking up the dust. Verse 14, now the king and all the people who were with him became weary, so they refreshed themselves there. Okay, let's just stop, you know. Let's regroup. We went out the hill, sackcloth, ashes, barefoot. We get to the top of the mountain. We worship. We come on down. This guy just harasses us. You know, we need to stop. We need to regroup. We need to refresh. Verse 15. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. And so it was when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king! Long live the king! So Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? why did you not go with your friend? So Absalom, he goes, I know who you're my dad's friend. You should be with him. You're not my friend, you're his friend. What are you doing here? And Hushai said to Absalom, no, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son, as I have served in your father's presence? So I will be in your presence. That sounds convincing, right? Verse 20, then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give advice as to what we should do. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father, and the hands of all who are with him will be strong. Remember, this was Nathan's prophecy to David, and here it's going to come to pass. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Talk about just an awful slap in the face for his dad, right? Anyways, that's enough of that. Keep going. Now the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one inquired of the oracle of God. So was all the advice of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. Now, for what it's worth, Ahithophel, as if he was an oracle of God, as if he spoke for God, and in fact, this advice, as bad as it is, brings to pass a prophecy that Nathan the prophet gave David. And so, a lot of times, people will speak things that are prophetic that are not godly. But God had ordained that these things would come to pass so that we will know the end from the beginning. And when it happens, we can say, that must be God. It's got his fingerprints all over it. Chapter 70, moreover. So the first part, God did. Second part, this is man. Okay? Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will rise and pursue David tonight. And I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee, and I will strike only the king. Then I will bring back all the people to you. When all return except the man whom you seek, all the people will be at peace. And the saying pleased Absalom and the elders of Israel. Verse 5, then Absalom said, now call Hushai the Archite also. Let us hear what he says too. And Hushai came to Absalom. Absalom spoke to him, saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up. So Hushai said to Absalom, the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. Remember, that's what he was sent in by David to do. Counter the advice of Ahithophel. So he says, verse 8, for Hushai said, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are enraged in their minds, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field, and your father is a man of war, and will not camp with the people. Remember how often he would sleep off by himself? I mean, he's a wise warrior. Verse 9, surely by now he is hidden in some pit or in some other place, and it will be when some of them are overthrown at the first, that whoever his will say, there's a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. And even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Actually, this is pretty good counsel, right? Verse 11. Get organized, okay? And what he's really doing, he's going to buy David some time. Therefore, I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you. Don't take off tonight with 12,000 men. Put a call out to all of Israel and say, come on down. We got an issue we need help with. That's going to take some time. Therefore, I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is in the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. And you go and lead this thing. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground, and of him and all the men who are with him there shall not be one left so much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring our ropes to the city, and we shall pull it into the river until there's not one small stone found there. So Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel. For the Lord had purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel to intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom. Okay? This is coming from the Lord. He's orchestrating this, right? And so we look into the ivory towers, whether it's a college campus or Oval Office or wherever it might be, and there's all these counselors, and they've all got their ideas. But don't think that God can't work in the middle of that. He's there, okay? Even amongst people who don't fear him. He's still there, okay? Verse 15, then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, thus and so Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus so I have advised. Now therefore, send quickly and tell David, saying, do not spend this night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. So tell him to run, to scatter. I bought you time, you guys got to beat feet. Okay? Verse 16, now therefore send quickly, verse 17, now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed at Enrogel, for they dared not be seen coming into the city. So a female servant would come and tell them, and they would go and tell King David. Nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom. But both of them went away quickly and came to the man's house at Bahurim, who went into a well in his court, and they went down into it. Then the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and spread ground grain on it, and the thing was not known. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? So the woman said to them, they have gone over the water brook. And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. It's kind of like how they, Rahab, hid the spies that came in, and it's kind of a repeat there. That would have been great-great-grandma Rahab, by the way, right? Interesting in all of that. Now it came to pass after they had departed that they came up out of the well and went and told King David and said to David, arise and cross over the water quickly, for thus Ahithophel advised against you. So David and all the people who were with them arose and crossed over the Jordan, but morning light, not one of them was left who had not gone over the Jordan. So it worked. Verse 23. Now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hanged himself and died, and he was buried at his father's tomb. Sore loser, right? That's very, very sad. But this is what happens when we work against God and we plot evil and wickedness and we let that bitterness grow in our heart. I mean, we have a suicide epidemic in our country today, because people get so inward focused. They're not looking out to God. They're not looking out for other people's best interests. They're all about themselves. And there's no more depressing subject on the planet than yourself. When you really think about it, get out of that. And but not this guy. Okay, verse 24. Then David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. Remember that in Genesis 32, that's where Jacob came to the brook at Jabbok, and he wrestled with the Lord all night. Now David's at this same place. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the army instead of Joab. This Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Jithra, an Israelite, who had gone into Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, the sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. Bad move politically, okay? The son of a niece of David, a cousin of Joab, and we've got this civil war now brewing, cousin versus cousin, okay? Verse 26, so Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead, okay? So that would be on what we call the Transjordan, on the hills going on up off the Sea of Galilee into that area. Verse 27, now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim, that Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the people of Ammon, Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought beads and basins, earthen vessels, and wheat, barley and flour, parched grain, beans, lentils, and parched seeds, honey and curd, sheep and cheese for the herd, and for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Okay? Friends in need are friends indeed, right? And David had made friends everywhere he went. And even though the whole world seemed to be turning against him, because he had used, as Jesus says in the parable, mammon to make friends for that evil day. If you remember that parable of the steward who was guilty of putting his debtor into prison, and finally says he gives it all away, and Jesus says, that's actually very shrewd of you. You've made friends, and now these friends are coming back to David, all these people. Chapter 18, and hopefully we can, I don't know how far we'll get, but verse 1. And David numbered or attended to the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over him. In facing all this trouble, one of the things he decides to do is get organized. Just don't run off in chaos. Stop and proceed decently and in order. Verse 2, then David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, and Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I also will surely go out with you myself. So these are all proven leaders and warriors. You'll see them in chapter 23 of David's mighty men. Verse 3, but the people answered, you shall not go out, for if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us, for you are now more help to us in the city. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captives orders concerning Absalom. And so fundamentally, now they're ready. They're in order. They're ready to fight back. And Absalom's coming. And David says, I'll go out and I'll deal with this myself. And they say, no. You're too valuable to us. Like the king on a chessboard. We can sacrifice a rook or a bishop or a pawn, but when you go, we're done. We have to protect you, and we'll go out and fight. And David, to his credit, accepts this wise counsel of the people. He's not such an egomaniac that he says, I got to do this myself, right? But he says, okay, I will submit to you. And in that he says, and also deal gently with the boy. Okay? And it says, and he said that in the hearing of all the people. So you can't say, I didn't know. Verse 6. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. And the people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. This is so sad on so many levels. Absalom may be Prince Charming, and he may have all the looks, and he may have won a lot of people to him, but his foreign policy, his diplomacy is awful. He is a terrible military strategist. 20,000 of his people are killed in his bloodlust to kill his father. And it's interesting, it says the woods devoured more people than the sword devoured. That doesn't mean that it was like a haunted forest. It just means that the terrain was so difficult that it created all kinds of problems for them in the battles and set them up for defeat. They were basically led into a trap of the terrain. Okay? They really didn't use good military strategy. Verse 9. Then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under a thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head was caught in the terebinth, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth. And the mule which was under him went on. Okay? He's kind of snared by his own glory. Right? The hair is the glory, right? And that glory bit him. And so he gets snagged, he gets tangled, and there he is hanging with his feet dangling off the ground between heaven and earth from this thing that everybody thought was so awesome. Verse 11, so Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him, and why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver on my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you, and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. I'm not going to kill him. David told us not to. Verse 13, otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. The end of Absalom, right? Sad, sad ending. Verse 16, so Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. Then they took Absalom and cast him in a large pit into the woods and lay a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, every one to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it's called Absalom's monument. Man, be very, very careful of the monuments you build for yourself. It became his tombstone. Verse 19. Then Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, now remember Zadok's a good priest, said, let me run now and take the news to the king, how the Lord has avenged him on his enemies. And Joab said to him, you shall not take the news this day, for you shall take the news another day. But today you shall take no news, because the king's son is dead. So quick to bring bad news. Then Joab said to the Cushite, okay, this would be a person from the south of Egypt, in the Nile River, right? A foreigner. Go tell the king what you have seen. So the Cushite bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, again said to Joab, but whatever happens, please let me also run after the Cushite. So Joab said, why will you run, my son, since you have no news ready? Too much coffee, maybe. Verse 23, but whatever happens, he said, let me run. So he said to him, run. And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Man. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate, to the wall, lifted his eyes and looked, and there was a man running alone. Then the watchman cried out and told the king, and the king said, if he's alone, there is news in his mouth. And he came rapidly and drew near. And so Ahimaaz here, he's known for his running, how fast he was, but not for his message. Okay? Busy, 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 but no fruit. Just how many people are like that? Then the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, there's another man running alone. And the king said, he also brings news. So the watchman said, I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, he is a good man and comes with good news. So Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, all is well. And then he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against the Lord my king. The king said, is the young man Absalom safe? Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant to me, your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I did not know what it was about. And the king said, turn aside and stand here. So he turned aside and stood still. Really? After all that, you can't tell me anything? And again, I go back to the news feeds. You can watch story after story after story where they say so many words, but they don't say anything. They just want to be on TV. Seems like. And you're like, he didn't say anything. Verse 31, then, just then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, there is good news, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you to this day, and all those who rose against you. And the king said to the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? So the Cushite answered, may the enemies, my lord the king, and all who rise against you to do harm, be like that young man. That's not the news David was hoping for. Verse 33, then the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. O Absalom, my son, my son. Rather ironic. You know what the name Absalom means? It's a compound of two words. Ab, for Abba, father, and Salam, or Shalom, peace. Absalom means my father's peace. How sad, how ironic. Chapter 19, verse 1. We're just about to, we'll go a little bit more. And Joab was told, Joab, he plays both sides of the fence. He just wants power. Joab was told, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. The people heard it and said that day, the king is grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day as people who are ashamed steal away, and they flee into battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, oh, my son, Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son. Then Joab came to the house to the king and said, today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life. The lives of your sons and your daughters, the lives of your wives, the lives of your concubines, and that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Basically, right. David, again, he continually fails as a father, and he was always weighting things in the wrong direction. Verse 7, now therefore arise, go out, and speak comfort to your servants. This is your job. You're the king. Speak to their hearts. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, no one will stay with you this night. And that will be worse for you than all the evil that's befallen you from your youth until now. Then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told the people, saying, there is a king sitting in the gate. So all the people came before the king, for everyone in Israel had fled to his tent. You need to consider others and how they are feeling. Even though you have just received some of the worst news that a parent can receive, stop and think. Others are watching. And this is true for us as Christians as well. We don't mourn as others who have no hope. We have to place our trust in God, just as Aaron the high priest, when his two sons were burned offering profane fire in the dedication of the tabernacle, God says you cannot mourn for them. What they did was wrong, and this is what I did to them. And if you're on my side, you need to stand up and tell the people what happened. That's hard to do. Of course, these are people in leadership. Priests, kings, these types of things. But if you are in that position of leadership, especially, you have to consider others and take the focus off of yourself and minister life. And when I was ordained as a pastor, I remember two things Pastor Gerald said to me as he laid hands on me. He says to teach the word and minister life. That's your job. You're always to bring Christ. You're always to bring life and hope and truth to the circumstances, whatever you do, regardless if it's convenient or whether it's something you feel like doing. That is your ordination. That's what you have to do. Give your grief to God and give others hope. Verse 9, now all the people were in dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king saved us from the hand of our enemies. He delivered us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, who we anointed over us, died in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king? This is kind of like the church in Laodicea with the second coming and the rapture and everything's around the corner, but you're just busy doing self. And Jesus is outside knocking on the door and wants in, and you're just busy taking care of yourself. Verse 11, so King David sent to Zadok, Abiathar the priest, saying, speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the king to his very house? You are my brethren, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and flesh? God do to me so, and more also, if you are not commander of the army before me continually, in place of Joab. So he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the heart of one man, so that they sent his word to the king, return you and all your servants. Basically amnesty. Okay? We're going to forgive you, but you need to come back now. Verse 15, then the king returned and came to the Jordan, and Judah came out to Gilgal to meet the king and to escort the king across the Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gera, remember the guy who curses and throws stones and kicks up dust? Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet David. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and 20 servants with him, and they went over the Jordan before the king. Then a ferry boat went across to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. Now Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king when he had crossed the Jordan. Then he said to the king, do not let my lord impute iniquity to me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my lord the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned. Therefore I am the first to come today of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, remember one of the hotheads, right, like a son of thunder, answered and said, shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? And David said, what have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For I do not know that today I am king. For do I not know that today I am king over Israel? Therefore the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king swore to him. Man, this is above and beyond, right? Forgive and forget and show mercy. In spite of all that it might cost you, it's the right thing to do. David's doing all kinds of wonderful things to reclaim the kingdom. In chapter 15, we have a rebellion in Absalom. In chapter 16, we had a runaway in David. In chapter 17, we had all the reconnaissance and the espionage and the Cold War. In chapter 18, we see the recovery of the kingdom. And now we're seeing everything is being restored. Okay? Verse 24, now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. And he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed, and the day he returned in peace. Well, partly all of his servants left, and he probably couldn't reach his feet and trim those toenails, right? But at whatever point, he had gone into mourning and, fasting and not taking care of himself. Verse 25, so it was when he had come from Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, why do you not go with me? Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? And he answered, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like an angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your eyes. When he says like an angel of God, he says, you talk to God. God talks to you. You can hear what God says about this. You figure it out. Verse 28, for all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king, yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore what right have I still to cry out any more to the king? So the king said to him, why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, you and Ziba divide the land. Then Mephibosheth said to the king, rather let him take it all, inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house. This is kind of a beautiful thing We're going to see it repeated with Solomon when the two women came with the babies, one who had died, and they're arguing over where the other baby is. And Solomon says, cut it in half. And one lady says, that's fine with me. The other one cries and freaks out. And Solomon says, that shows what your heart is. You're the mom. And here Mephibosheth says, let him have the kingdom of Saul. Let him have the land. And I don't care about that. I'm just glad you're back, David. That shows the heart of Mephibosheth and who the real liar is. But David leaves it up to him. And Mephibosheth offers all of that. Just as Abraham offered it to Lot. You know what? God's taking good care of me. I don't need to worry. You take whatever you want. I got God. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop right there. I would love to have finished all of this. Oh, maybe we can. Can we do this really fast? I'll just... And Barzillai, the Gileadite, came down from Rogelim and went across the Jordan with the king to escort him across the Jordan. But now Barzillai was a very good man, or a very aged man, 80 years old. And he had provided the king with supplies while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very rich man. And the king said to Barzillai, come across with me, and I will provide for you while you are with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the king, how long have I to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am today 80 years old. Can I discern between good and bad? Can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way across the Jordan with the king. And why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant turn back again, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chiham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what seems good to you. And the king answered, Chimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. Now whatever you request of me, I will do for you. So Barzillai, who had taken good care of David on the other side, David says, let me repay you. Come up and live with me. Kind of like he said to Mephibosheth, son of, descendant of Jonathan. Come and live with me. Barzillai says, man, that'd be a waste. I can't taste the food. I can't hear the music. Just let me go home. I want to die and be buried with my parents. But take this young man. If you want to do a blessing, bless Chiham. Okay? Then all the people went over the Jordan. When the king had crossed over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own place. Verse 40. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah escorted the king, also half the people of Israel. So this already you're seeing this divided nation, right? A little bit of this, us and them, right? Judah and Israel, but they've distinguished themselves. Judah is certainly in David's camp, but Israel, at least half of them are on board with this. Verse 41, just then the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king, his household, and all David's men with him across the Jordan? So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is a close relative of ours, why then are you angry over this matter? Have we ever eaten at the king's expense, or has he given us any gift? We're just doing what we're doing, right? But this rift is starting to brew, right? We're going to see it come full circle with Rehoboam and Jeroboam, right, in this division. Verse 43, and the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 shares in the king. Therefore, we also have more right to David than you. It's almost like dividing the baby, right? Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise to bring back our king? Yet the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. It's like, really? No matter what. David's doing all these gracious things. Just restoring peace and order, harmony, unity, prosperity, security. He's bringing it all. But there's always somebody, I want my piece. I want a bigger piece, right? And so if you're one of those maybe not elite, maybe you're just a fisherman or a craftsman, a shepherd or a farmer, and all these things are happening in the world, and you're thinking, Why does it seem to just land on my shoulders? Just know that in this world, God sees us all. And He's working all things together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. So the question now is, are we going to set our heart on the King and serve Him regardless of the election? Are we going to set our heart to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God, and allow Him to be the one who blesses us and cares for us? He's a good shepherd. Amen? Lord Jesus, I thank You for these stories, as hard as they are, and we see the wickedness full strength, and it's shocking, and it's so sad. I pray that we would never become jaded to it, callous. 20,000 people died because of a father-son dispute. That's so wrong, Lord. And I know You see every one of those souls. You know who they are, and You have a plan, an eternal plan for them. But each one of us stands and falls before You. Help us be those who have chosen You as King. In Jesus' name. Amen.